because Philippa is an author, global thought leader, social innovator, podcast host, and the CEO and founder of TIE Leadership. And her book, which came out in April, is called Return on Humanity, and it's leadership lessons from all corners of the world. And it draws on a lifetime of experience in leading the way in using marketing and advertising as a force for good. And we'll hear more about that. And also from her many incredible podcast conversations on the TIE Unearthed podcast. So
Paul's one of them. Yeah.
Yes, including Paul's. And so I'll hand it over to you, Philippa.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. It's a huge pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the questions after. So I hope that I'm not sort of just speaking at you. So the idea is for this to be as interactive as possible. But just to give you a bit of a taste, I guess, of what I do and what I've been doing for 20 years now. But before I even get there, I'll just explain where I am, because it is obviously, I'm sure you're like, that seems maybe slightly different architecture, painting's a little bit different. So yes, I'm in Brazil. My accent isn't Brazilian, so my accent's Canadian. I grew up in Canada, but I was also born in South Africa, and I've been living here for 20 years. So the subtitle of my book is Leadership Lessons from All Corners of the World. And I guess that I sort of come by that honestly, just because I have kind of been all over the place, but my work is also quite global, which I'll get to. And so, yeah, I think where I'll start, I would like to tell you a story as to why I started what I do. But before I get there, I'll just explain. So I am the CEO and the founder of TIE Leadership. And it's rooted in developing the leaders that we need in our companies to create more human cultures. And so it's what I like to say is, and what we'll get to is return on humanity, obviously, is playing on return on investment, but it's a return on being more human in business. And I think there's a lot of conversations around this. I'm actually just on a bit of a speaker circuit at the moment with the American Chamber of Commerce, and they have this CEO forum, and they're talking about the importance of happiness as a business strategy. And it's great because a lot of businesses are talking about this, right? Oh, we need people to be happy. There's a lot of buzzwords going around: purpose, better communication. We need people to have connection and belonging, and we need people to feel excited and resilient and determined. And that's all great. And so that's all about sort of, okay, we need to create those environments. We need to create that culture. But I guess the big question is, how does that happen? Right? Because we can talk about all of that. You get these CEOs standing up on the stages and they're talking about how great their companies are and aren't we wonderful, and we're doing fantastic stuff. But then no one's actually talking about how that is actually possible. Well, the way that you create a more human culture is with more human leaders. So what do I mean by that? I mean leaders that are able to tap into the power of their human competencies. So yes, the competencies of flexibility and empathy and cultural intelligence, vulnerability. These are all massively strong words, but actually what's interesting is we have been taught through the powers of education and family pressures and culture and our businesses that actually to be vulnerable is a weakness. To be empathetic is a weakness. To be kind is actually a weakness. When you're negotiating, you need to be tough. You need to be forceful. You need to be sort of competition. You go to these business schools and, it's competition. You're evaluated on a bell curve. But actually, that's kind of weird, because we actually do know that if we're wanting to go down this road of having more human cultures, we need people to understand the power of tapping into their human competencies. And I believe that literally every single person on this planet has them, right? So everyone has the potential. It doesn't matter how much money you have, where you are in society, where you come from. It can be Tanzania, Malawi, Brazil, London, New York. Everybody has the ability to be more human. But the problem is that we don't really know how to tap into that or even understand the strength of it, because we've never really been taught that or given permission to be more vulnerable. So the question is, can you teach empathy or resilience or cultural intelligence over a PowerPoint presentation. My belief is it's probably not possible to do that. It's more possible to, you have to feel it viscerally within your essence, the power of what happens when you are more vulnerable, or what it means when you actively listen. Okay, you listen to people, but when you don't do that and you're in a situation and it literally doesn't work and you're not able to gain the trust of people, you feel that because there's consequences. But that you have to be put in situations that are different to be able to understand that. So that's kind of how I explain what I do. Is I develop the leaders. I've been doing this for 20 years. I develop the leaders to create the cultures that our businesses need to be more successful. How do I do that? I take people to the edge of their mental maps and I gently nudge them off, forcing an evolution. And that evolution is behavior change. But you can really only do that when you viscerally feel something. So let me just back up and explain why I wrote my book, why TIE exists. And then we can open up to questions and I can answer stuff. So as I said, I was born in South Africa, grew up in Canada, grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. So if you can picture Canada, Winnipeg's literally right in the middle, as far away from any sea as possible. Interestingly, I live on the sea now in Brazil and have been here for 20 years. And on the equator, it's got down to like minus 40 degrees in Winnipeg. So it's like, I weirdly have sort of gone one end to the spectrum to the other as far as where I live. My children were born in Brazil. They speak Portuguese. I speak to them in English. They respond in Portuguese. It's all a very complicated life kind of situation. But anyway, growing up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, obviously the exposure that I had to any kind of sense of purpose, or, I mean, you do have parts that are like unequal as far as society, but how you imagine Canada is pretty much how Winnipeg was growing up. It's very normal and safe and ride your bike down the street and everything's fine. When I'd go to South Africa to go and visit my family, and very cold, yeah, minus 60 with the wind chill. I mean, how you walk to school is logistically very different to anything you can imagine. You have to plug your car in so it actually turns on in the wintertime. I mean, that's crazy. Anyway, but yes, I grew up, so when I would go to South Africa, the conversations were very, very different. My uncle and aunt were really involved in the anti-apartheid movement. My uncle was Nelson Mandela's doctor when he came out of prison. So literally, when he came out of prison and started negotiations with the apartheid government, he needed a doctor to be with him to ensure that he stayed healthy, because if he didn't, a civil war could have broken out. So they needed somebody to be that person. He was not chosen to be that person because he was some rich, famous, powerful doctor at all. That was not what it was. It was because he was who he was, which I'll explain in a bit, which was a very humble person who had just kind of been fighting for this for a really long time. And he was a doctor and people liked him. And so he was that person. There's not one picture of him with Nelson Mandela. He was not in any way. And he never even really talked about it. I was the one who was like, I just can't believe it. Like, you worked with Nelson Mandela? He's like, yeah, I did so many other things that were actually so much more important than that. Like, he didn't even really talk about it. So, but when I was at his funeral, when I was at his celebration of life, it was life-changing. And I would say it's probably the reason why I wrote my book and I do what I do. I remember looking around the room and just seeing this sea of different faces from so many different parts of society and people. You know, you had medical colleagues, comrades, they were called comrades from the struggle. There were family members. There was the Minister of Health with his bodyguards. And then there were so many people from the communities. And there were obviously people on the list to speak, and they spoke. But I remember I was sitting beside one guy and he put up his hand and he said, I'm not on the list to speak, but I'd like to. And he and another person that spoke are the reason I do what I do. And this was in 2004. So he put up his hand and he said, I'm not on the list to speak. I'd like to go to the front, please. And so everyone's like, hey, yeah, go ahead. So he walked up and he said, so Neil was the only doctor in our community who actually made an effort to speak our language. All the other doctors treated us like animals, and they were vets. Now, growing up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, this for me was something I had never even considered that being a thing. I mean, I was kind of blown away. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, particularly in a place like South Africa, where there's so many different languages. But what a challenge, and how crazy that he was the only one that made an effort to treat people like human beings. And then this other woman put up her hand, and she went to the front, and she was this, I mean, she didn't just go to the front. I remember she had this extraordinary presence, and she sort of strode to the front, and she was sort of this large African lady, and she just like captured everyone's attention. She also wasn't on the list to speak, but she went up. Everyone's like, oh, I mean, even just getting goosebumps just thinking about it. And she said, I was in jail for a part of apartheid. I was in a Black jail. So that would have been in a Black part of town. I could count on Neil like clockwork, that he would be there. He was helping me from a medical point of view. I had medical issues, but he was also my eyes and ears on the outside. And he was risking his life to do that because it was a Black jail in a Black part of town. He's white during apartheid. But that didn't stop him. He went, and he was the light at a very dark time in my life. And just to be really, really clear, because this is where things can, this is not about white savior, some white man coming. They were friends, like they're friends. And he was being a friend to support his friend. Anyway, so as I'm listening to these stories, and looking around, I mean, as I say, Neil, he and Justine, his wife, my aunt, there would be all these stories. They inspired me like crazy. I mean, but it was amazing to see all of these people and be like, God, he really touched the lives of so many different people from so many different walks of life. But then I realized, isn't it interesting? They also made him who he is. It's not one way. So what was that? I mean, he bridged divides. He stepped out of a what could have been privileged sort of white doctor during apartheid South Africa. I mean, the majority, you can imagine what it's like, right? Or what it was like. But he used his privilege to challenge a broken system, and in return, developed a pretty clear purpose. And by expanding his personal circle and actually understanding different worlds, it got him seeing himself in a different way and seeing the world in a different way. And at the time I was working in London in advertising. So this is 2004. And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it's very easy to fall into a routine of going to work with the same sorts of people, and then going to the pub and having conversations with the same sorts of people. And then at the time, living in a shared house because you're, a student or whatever, sort of coming out of being a student, and then sort of your first shared house experience, probably with people from university or friends that going to dinner parties with similar people. So you're living in this bubble, and we're all guilty of it, even now, all of us. Of course we are, kids going to the same sorts of schools, hanging out with people. It's comfortable, it's nice. But we're also expected to challenge broken systems and give nuanced advice and be inspiring leaders and to build global brands, or, do whatever it is that, and, obviously we're talking in the marketing world, but actually return on humanity isn't just marketing and advertising, it's business in general, right? So, I mean, as business people, we need to have these competencies. And if you actually think about the types of people that you admire, or the leaders that have touched you and your life over the years, and that helped make you who you are, if you think about those competencies, it could be a parent, it could be a boss, it could be a family member, or whatever. Those people, to make you who you are, to empower you, to believe in you, to empathize with you, to understand you, they all have to have those human competencies. But then the question is, how do you develop those insights and those human competencies and that understanding of how the world works, and to develop you Well, you need to step out of your comfort zone. You need to push yourself to the edge of your mental map and get gently nudged off to suddenly see people in a different way, see yourself in a different way, to understand how the world works. It's very easy to kind of just get stuck in our routines of life, right? Mm-hmm. But we also know that to grow and to be able to develop ourselves, we need to find ourselves in situations that leave our feet just a little bit off the ground, right? And in those situations of discomfort. But it also has everything to do with expanding our minds, bridging divides, understanding different worlds. Because it's then that we start to understand the power of empathy, even understanding what empathy is, even understanding just sort of how different, once you get those macro perspectives and you gain that understanding of how the world works, when we're talking about the concepts of, self-awareness, interdependence, and interconnectedness, those for me are the three pillars of being more human as an individual, but also just in business and being a leader. So knowing who you are, what is your human compass? What is your purpose? What are you really good at? What makes you happy? How can you live your life with intention? So self-awareness. Interdependence is we can't make decisions on our own. The world has evolved so much. We need other people, right? So we can't make decisions in a vacuum. We need other divisions. We need other sectors. We need other regions, other countries, other cultures. We need to bring voices in from the outside, from communities, to be able to figure out what the heck we can do to find the solutions to things, to understand how the world works. But then coming back to human competencies, that ability to create that interdependent, collaborating, cohesive environment, you need to have empathy, understand how to gain trust with people who are very different to yourself. How do you connect with people who come from a completely different environment? And then the final one is interconnectedness. So interconnectedness is, and obviously Paul talks a lot about this, but it's not about shareholders, it's about stakeholders, right? So what happens in one place impacts people in another place. So we need to understand about civil society. Civil society needs to be part of what's going on, and involving customers and involving consumers and involving understanding the environment, just understanding how all of that works and how it's all connected, and our place in decisions and how what we do impacts more than just ourselves or just our company. And so just sort of summarizing, when we're talking about a return on humanity, it is proven that the more human an environment is, the happier people are. So we're talking about, happiness. People are 400% more innovative and creative when they're happy. Companies are 21% more profitable when people are engaged. Well, that makes sense, because if I'm not engaged in something, I don't give a shit. I'm not going to work hard. I'm not going to be creative, and I'm not going to fight for it. I'm not going to put all of my energy in to find the solutions. I'm just going to do the bare minimum and whatever. I don't care. So the more engaged people are, but people don't get engaged with money. If your main objective is money, it's not going to get people excited, and it's not going to create those environments. The focus needs to be on people. It needs to be people first, humanity, creating those environments that people feel connection, feel belonging, feel excited about being a part of it, want to give their everything, want to come up with great ideas and stick around. Profit follows, and it's proven that the return is higher when you focus on people first. And so that's the return on humanity.
Just as you talked about South Africa and Nelson Mandela, we happened to have a former gathering that we had at MarketingKind was with Ian Goldin, and he was Nelson Mandela's chief economic advisor.
Oh yeah,
when he was president. And he cites some of the well-known lines, like you do in the book, about it seems impossible until it's done. But he specifically picked out how rapidly narratives can change, societal narratives. He points out that, nobody would think apartheid would be a good idea for South Africa today. even though at the time it seems almost impossible to believe, but a majority of white people when Mandela was in prison did believe that was right. He said that 20% of people can change 80% of our narratives. So he does believe in the power of progressive change to be fast. But if we think about the sort of global conversations today, it doesn't necessarily feel that the right 20% of people are changing the right 80% of narratives. What do you see as, what would it take to actually amplify this message in such a way that what you're talking about, which really could be entirely normal, it could be so normal that you wouldn't write a book about it because it would be that clear. So why is that conversation not spreading in a more fertile way?
So I love the question. I think it's so great. It just reminds me of the conversations I was having with my aunt while I was writing the book, because she's still alive. And she was really, in fact, I would say that it's possibly because of her that my uncle was as involved in the struggle as he was. She's an activist like crazy. She won't even come on a podcast because she's actually very humble and but she's on the ground, was a human shield to Black students who were getting shot at gun, like point blank kind of thing. And when I talked to her about, I mean, there was even a part of the book that I had to take out because I was talking about revolution. And I actually had that story of her being a human shield, and I was using the word of revolution. But because it's a business book, I was told by some advisors that I had to take it out because it's perhaps a little bit too trying to create a war and an actual sort of bloody revolution. But I do believe that what she kept telling me in that particular part, I hope I still have it somewhere because I need to post it or something, but you know, even though she did, I mean, I don't know many people who would go and be a human shield, get on a bus with a whole lot of other people in a situation where people are actually being shot, and knowing that you won't get shot because you're white, and standing there. And now the reason I'm saying that is I thought that that was a huge thing that she did. And she didn't say it. She's like, you have no idea the people I know who died doing things that were unreal. She said this was, she actually said, and I don't quote me on it, but she was saying how, you know, there were so many different movements and people involved to stop apartheid. Now, there was a lot of international policy conversations happening. Yes, that contributed, but she said it wasn't that at all. It was the people. And it was the people who did small things and big things, people who hid us in houses because the military vehicles were going down our street and scaring us. And so we had to go into hiding. Those people who took us in did huge things, huge. And she said it was this movement that just was boiling, and it just rose up. And that's what I see this as being, because I don't think that people feel, and this all comes down to how people, leaders, and then ... companies make people feel. What do people want to be a part of? So if it like this thinking, as obviously Paul knows, because we had this conversation on my podcast, but you know, the thinking around profit first, only, you know, no quality of life, people just basically being a cog in a machine, that comes from an industrial revolution time, which actually, I mean, was it good? No. Was it great for people? No. Was it good for the environment? No. I mean, it wasn't great, but you can understand how it worked in that time because it was very focused on a certain region. People were making sort of uniform products and services, and it was sort of independent thinking. But we're in a totally different time. We need people to be creative. We need people to come up with different ideas. We need people, everything is connected. So, you know, we know of interconnectedness, and also you can't hide. And people are demanding a lot more from companies. So it purely comes down to supply and demand. Like, and at the end of the day, people don't like a company and they don't feel like it's working for them, they won't work there. I mean, and so it's sort of this, it's not in the same way that we had to, that apartheid ended, it was a slow burn, and it was this buildup of people saying that this doesn't work. But it's not even saying that it doesn't work in the sense, like in the case of apartheid, it was against people's human rights. Like, it was insane. It was not sustainable. People were being horribly oppressed. It's a bit different now, but at the same time, it's still what people are going to put up with. If people don't want to work for companies that don't understand these dynamics, those companies are probably just going to go out of business, and money talks. So it's a movement. And so I think the more that we talk about this, and the more that we actually understand it, and we understand those nuances and help educate people about it. So again, what's interesting is at these conferences that I've been a part of, everyone's talking about all of these buzzwords and the importance of being happy in business. And you've got all these CEOs from the biggest companies you can imagine, who, PepsiCo and 3M and Uber and Amazon, I mean, all of them. And they're all standing up and saying how brilliant they are, literally. Which is kind of weird, because we also know everything that's going on. So the moment that people are honest, and they're transparent, and they're vulnerable, and saying, okay, well, we're getting this right, we're not getting this right. And it's like, it's that kind of education that sort of, we're starting to, oh, okay, hold on, are they really being vulnerable? So anyway, yeah.
It's certainly with us, it's okay to bring out the expurgated parts of your material. We had a gathering with Mike Berners-Lee, and he has admitted that on the climate emergency, it does seem to be getting a bit late just to ask nicely. And actually on truthfulness, we'll be talking to him in what is now going to be September because of the general election, on how we can improve truthfulness around public discourse on the climate emergency. We just had a gathering with Jonathan Porritt, who has said that he believes increasingly in non-violent direct action, and sort of semi-joke that a future exchange with him could have a very different background to what he does. It's the biggest year for democracy in human history.
Yeah.
What could be included in the campaigns around the world that would actually change the system to enable a greater return on humanity to be scaled and to be far more mainstream?
I mean, it's a massive question, right? And it's funny, I was interviewed by Mishcon Durea, the law firm, and the person who was interviewing me, she's amazing, Verity, and she can't remember, Taylor, I think, and she runs the pro bono area of Mishcon. But her father is a name that you guys will know, and I can't remember it. And anyway, he's an MP for the Labour Party. 30 something years, 40 years or something like that, 50 years or something crazy. So he's retiring, but he's still going at like 85 years old. So she asked the same question, a bit different, but same idea. I mean, I talk about this in the book. So if you've read the book, you'll know that I touch on this, because living in Brazil, it's an incredibly polarized country. People still talking about Bolsonaro and Lula. I mean, Bolsonaro is, I don't even know if he's in Brazil, because I think he can't even come into the country. But anyway, everyone's still sort of, you've got and I think with all of this, we need to have conversations. I think that's what all of this comes down to. Now, no one's going to do a campaign to say, talk to the other side. So I don't know that comes into the actual campaigning, but I do think that one thing we as individuals need to do, because of course, I'm sure probably all of us have similar political views. We all believe them very strongly. But I think what we all just need to remember is, maybe we're not married to a political party. Maybe we have certain values that we hold true. And maybe it's important to understand why other people, half the population, is voting for another party or another side, or because in the case of Bolsonaro, for example, I know a lot of really beautiful, amazing people that voted for Bolsonaro. Now, I think Bolsonaro as an individual is a hideous, horrible individual, but there are reasons why these really lovely, beautiful people have voted for him. Now, I think it's important that I understand that, because the more that I do understand that, more we can build bridges, the more that we can empathize, but the more that we believe that we are right and we are the owners of the truth, and the more that we think that the other side are the devil, and both sides are thinking that of each other, right? So, the Lulas hate the Bolsonaros and the Bolsonaros hate the Lulas. So you just have this situation where people aren't communicating. And then without communication, you don't understand. And then you can't change things. So it's like when we're buying an LP or, when we were buying music tapes and CDs and LPs, we would buy the album. But to be honest, we only bought 1 or 2 songs on that album. But suddenly you're married to the album. And it's kind of, that's not how this works. And we need to understand what the songs are that we like, and we talk about those songs, but then we want to understand the other songs that the other people like on the other albums.